The news hit Earth like a hammer. One moment, the planet's people were going about their lives, worrying about bills, vacations, and election campaigns. The next, every screen flickered, every feed froze, and an alien warlord's voice thundered into their homes. The broadcast was unmistakable. Earth was on borrowed time. Humans of the third planet, the warlord began. His words translated into every known language. His voice was deep and gravelly, as if he were speaking through a mountain. You have trespassed on our trade routes, insulted our emissaries, and defiled our artifacts. You have done so with impunity for far too long. Civilians in cafes stopped sipping their coffees. Commuters on trains froze in their seats. It wasn't just a threat. It was an ultimatum. The warlord's face, gray-skinned and harshly angular, filled every screen. Behind him, vast rows of his fleet gleamed. The sheer scale of his military power dwarfed anything Earth had ever seen. A younger man in a New York apartment turned to his roommate, eyes wide. "Is this for real? Who is this guy?" "Don't know," his roommate muttered, jaw clenched. "But he's not bluffing." The warlord continued. "You have 2 cycles to prepare yourselves. And then, my fleet will descend upon you. Your planet will be brought to order. Your people will kneel." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Earth's population in a stunned, collective silence. Across the globe, political leaders, military generals, and top scientists scrambled into emergency meetings. Questions flooded the media. Who were these aliens? Why attack now? Could Earth even defend itself? Meanwhile, a small delegation was quickly pulled together to find a peaceful solution. Among them was a linguist and cultural expert, Thomas, a middle-aged man with a background in interstellar diplomacy. He wasn't a soldier, nor a politician. He was, however, someone who had spent years studying alien languages and customs. He had earned respect for his cool-headed approach to conflict, and now he was tasked with the impossible: stopping a war before it started. "I've heard the stories," said David, one of the military strategists assigned to the team. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor, David had spent years in the field and was known for his tactical brilliance. "These guys don't negotiate. They see compromise as weakness." Thomas sighed, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "We don't have a choice. We can't win a straight-up fight. The only path forward is finding some common ground." "Common ground with someone who just told the whole planet to kneel?" David shook his head. "Good luck with that." The delegation was hurriedly shuttled to the United Nations compound in Geneva, where representatives from around the world had gathered to form a unified response. Security officers scanned everyone twice. Hallways buzzed with anxious conversations. In the main conference room, top officials sat around a massive circular table. On the far end, a hologram of the alien warlord's face flickered, as though his presence alone was enough to disrupt Earth's technology. "What is it you want from us?" the Secretary General asked, his voice firm but strained. "You will submit," the warlord said simply. "You will accept our laws, our oversight, and our rule. If you refuse, you will be erased." Thomas leaned toward the microphone, trying to project calm despite the rising tension in the room. "May I ask a question?" The warlord turned his gaze to Thomas, his expression unreadable. "Speak. You accuse us of disrespecting your trade routes and artifacts. If we have wronged you in some way, it may not have been intentional. Can you explain exactly what we've done to provoke you?" There was a pause, a long silence filled with the quiet hum of the hologram's transmitter. The warlord seemed to consider this, as if weighing whether Thomas's inquiry was worth addressing. "Our relics are sacred, our corridors of commerce, inviolate. Your vessels wandered where they did not belong. Your traders scavenged from ruins they did not understand. You offended our traditions." Thomas glanced at David, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed. David gave a small nod, as if urging him to continue. "Traditions," Thomas repeated, his voice even. "We respect traditions, even if we don't always understand them. If we could learn more about your customs, perhaps we could find a way to—" You believe understanding will spare you? The warlord interrupted, his voice cold. Understanding does not erase the insult. It does not change what has already been done. The Secretary General interjected. With all due respect, we have no desire for conflict. If there's a way to repair relations, there is no repair, the warlord declared. Only submission or annihilation. David stepped forward. If I may, what's the point of ruling over rubble? You could destroy us, but what would you gain? Our resources? You clearly have more advanced technology. Our labor? You have your own people. If there's a way to make this work for both of us. The warlord tilted his head, studying David with a flicker of curiosity. You speak of mutual benefit. You assume we desire cooperation. We do not. We desire order. And order is best achieved through domination. As the warlord's image vanished once more, the room was left in a charged silence. Officials muttered nervously, some throwing up their hands, others burying their faces in their hands. But Thomas and David exchanged a glance. Well, David said at last, his voice low, this might be tougher than we thought. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. Tough isn't the word. But we're not done yet. We have to keep talking, keep pushing. There has to be a way to get through to them. David clapped him on the shoulder. Then let's get to it. Chapter 2, First Contact. The shuttle docked smoothly against the warlord's flagship. As the airlocks engaged, Thomas and David exchanged a brief look. There was no ceremony, no welcoming committee, just the oppressive hum of the alien ship's environmental systems seeping through the bulkhead. The hatch hissed open. On the other side stood 3 alien guards, their forms tall and angular, their uniforms a sharp contrast of silver and black. Each held a long staff-like weapon that crackled faintly at the ends. They didn't speak, but their piercing gazes were enough to convey their authority. This is it, David muttered under his breath. No turning back now. Thomas nodded, stepping forward. We're ready. Lead the way. The guards moved silently, their movements fluid and precise. As they guided Thomas and David through the ship's corridors, the scale of the vessel became apparent. The walls were sleek and reflective, lined with faintly glowing conduits that pulsed in rhythmic patterns. The floor seemed to absorb sound, and the air carried a faint metallic tang. Feels like walking through a machine, David murmured. Maybe it is, Thomas replied softly, taking in their surroundings. After a few minutes, they arrived at an expansive chamber. The ceiling stretched high above, disappearing into darkness. At the center stood a raised platform, flanked by towering sculptures that seemed more alive than static. Light streamed from an unseen source, creating shifting patterns across the floor. And there, on the platform, stood the warlord. He was larger than any human, his skin a deep gray that shimmered slightly under the light. His armor was ornate, etched with symbols that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when viewed from different angles. His eyes were a stark, glowing white, and his gaze settled on the newcomers with a weight that felt almost physical. You've come, he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. We have, Thomas replied. I'm Thomas, a representative of Earth's diplomatic council. This is David, our military liaison. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly. The warlord's eyes narrowed slightly. You have 2 voices, one of diplomacy and one of war. What do you expect to accomplish with such a pairing? Thomas took a step forward, keeping his tone measured. We're here to find a way to avoid conflict. David's presence isn't about threatening you. It's about showing that we understand the stakes and take them seriously. The warlord tilted his head, his expression unreadable. You think words can change what is already set in motion? Words are all we have, Thomas said. And sometimes they're enough. We can't match your fleet. We can't outfight you. But we believe there's value in understanding each other. If you're willing to listen, we're ready to explain our perspective. A silence stretched out between them, broken only by the faint hum of the chamber. Then the warlord lifted one hand, and the guards stepped aside. Speak then, the warlord said. But know that my patience is not infinite. Thomas nodded, glancing at David. Thank you, he said, before turning back to the Warlord. Earth is young compared to your civilization. We've made mistakes, some out of ignorance, some out of arrogance. But we've also learned to adapt, to grow. We value independence and creativity, traits that have helped us survive and thrive in a universe that often seems indifferent to our existence. The Warlord remained silent, his expression unchanging. We're not asking you to ignore the wrongs we may have done, Thomas continued. We're asking for a chance to understand what we've done wrong and find a way to make it right. Not just for us, but for the future of our two species. David spoke up then, his voice firm. And we're willing to prove that through action. If there are traditions we've violated, tell us what they are. If there are relics we've damaged, let us repair or replace them. But starting a war would only destroy what little we might have to offer each other. The Warlord's eyes narrowed again, his glowing gaze shifting from Thomas to David. You claim to value understanding, yet your kind has taken what is not theirs. You claim to desire peace, yet you come with a soldier at your side. I'm not here to fight, David said, meeting the Warlord's gaze. I'm here to show that even someone who knows war sees the value in peace. Thomas can tell you what we hope for. I can tell you what we want to avoid. Together, we can give you the full picture. For the first time, the Warlord seemed to consider their words. His posture, though still imposing, softened slightly. You speak boldly for a species that stands on the brink of destruction, he said. Very well. You will have your chance to explain. But be warned. If your words fail to convince me, your world will know the consequences. The Warlord gestured to one of his guards. Escort them to the council chamber. They may present their case there. The guard stepped forward, motioning for Thomas and David to follow. We're not out of the woods yet, David muttered as they turned to leave. Not by a long shot, Thomas replied. But at least we're still talking. Chapter 3. The Cultural Exchange. The council chamber was vast, its walls shimmering with a translucent light that seemed to shift between shades of blue and gold. Circular seats hovered a few feet off the ground, arranged in tiers around a central speaking platform. Thomas and David were escorted to the center, where the alien delegates sat waiting. They were a mix of species, each unique in appearance. Some with scaled skin, others with luminescent eyes, and one whose translucent body pulsed faintly as though containing a living current. At the head of the council sat the Warlord, flanked by his advisors. Thomas stepped forward first, aware of the weight of every move he made. Thank you for allowing us to speak, he began. We understand the gravity of this situation, and we're here to offer clarity and a path forward. One of the council members, a tall alien with silvery feathers, clicked its beak-like mouth. Your kind has already caused disruption among our trade routes and violated sacred sites. Why should we entertain further conversation? David leaned closer to Thomas and murmured, They're not giving us much wiggle room. Let me try something, Thomas whispered back. Louder, he addressed the council. I hear your concerns, and I don't deny that we've made mistakes. But much of this stems from misunderstanding. Humans are explorers by nature. Sometimes our curiosity gets the better of us, and we don't always recognize when we're stepping on sacred ground. A heavy silence followed his words. Thomas felt every gaze on him. The Warlord's white eyes remained fixed on the two humans, his expression unreadable. David decided to step in. When we reach out into the stars, we're not looking for conflict. We're searching for knowledge, for new ideas, and yes, for resources to sustain our growing population. But that doesn't mean we don't respect the boundaries of others. If we overstepped, it wasn't deliberate. A low murmur spread through the council. The alien with the feathered face tilted its head, and one of the luminescent-eyed delegates raised a hand to speak. Its voice was melodic, each word resonating softly in the chamber. If your kind seeks knowledge, why did you not first ask? Why plunder and trespass before establishing trust? Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that every word mattered. In truth, our methods were flawed. I won't stand here and make excuses, But I can say that this encounter, this opportunity to stand before you, is proof that we're willing to learn. We're willing to change. The warlord's voice cut through the air. And what assurances can you offer that your kind will not repeat these offenses? David answered without hesitation. We can start by sharing our own knowledge, our technology, our scientific data, our cultural insights. If we understand each other better, we'll know how to avoid these mistakes in the future. Another council member, this one with a shimmering, faceted exoskeleton, leaned forward. Would you truly offer your knowledge freely, even to those who might use it against you? Thomas replied carefully. We would offer it in the spirit of mutual respect and trust. And if that trust can't be established right now, then we'll take steps to prove ourselves first. David nodded, backing him up. If we need to earn your trust, we're prepared to do so. Give us tasks, give us challenges, whatever it takes to show we're serious. The murmuring grew louder, the council clearly deliberating among themselves. The warlord remained silent, his eyes narrowing as he observed the humans. Finally, he raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. Very well, we will test your words. If you wish to demonstrate your intentions, you will work alongside our people on a controlled endeavor. You will help restore one of the sites you have damaged. Thomas felt a flicker of relief. This wasn't a promise of peace, but it was a start. We accept, David added. Tell us what you need. We'll do everything we can to make it right. The warlord's expression didn't change, but he gave a curt nod. You will begin immediately. My advisor will oversee your efforts. Fail and our original terms remain unchanged. Succeed, and we may reconsider. A moment later, one of the advisors stepped forward. She was striking in appearance, her skin a deep indigo with delicate patterns that shimmered faintly when she moved. Her voice was firm but calm as she addressed Thomas and David. Follow me. I will take you to the restoration site. As they walked behind her, David glanced at Thomas. Looks like we're not going home anytime soon. Thomas managed a small smile. No. But if this works, we might still have a home to return to. They followed the advisor down a long corridor, the weight of their mission settling over them. While the future was uncertain, for the first time, they felt the glimmer of a real opportunity. Chapter 4: A Shared Vulnerability. The restoration site was not what Thomas or David expected. After hours of travel within the enormous alien vessel, they finally arrived at a vast chamber brimming with intricate artifacts. Glowing symbols covered the walls, carved into dark, metallic surfaces that hummed faintly when approached. Some of the objects appeared ancient, etched with patterns that seemed alive. Others were delicate and colorful, floating in crystalline cases. This is the artifact hall of the Tsareth Order. Their guide, the indigo-skinned alien advisor, explained as they walked. Her voice carried a calm authority. It is sacred to my people. These relics were entrusted to us to safeguard through generations. Some are weapons of a bygone era, others are cultural treasures. When humans entered this hall uninvited, they disrupted the energy patterns of the artifacts, and a few were physically damaged. Thomas nodded, doing his best to absorb the alien's words. And you'd like us to help repair them? The advisor paused in front of a large structure resembling a tree, though its branches were formed of sharp, gleaming metal. Yes, but you must understand, restoring these artifacts is not simply a matter of physical repair. Their energy signatures must be realigned. It will require precision, patience, and an understanding of our traditions. David stepped forward, examining the tree-like structure closely. And if we mess it up? She turned her piercing gaze on him. If you fail, the council will see it as confirmation that your kind cannot be trusted. The consequences will be grave. Thomas glanced at David. No pressure, right? David gave a wry grin. None at all. The advisor instructed them on the process. They would work alongside a small team of alien technicians who specialized in energy alignment. While the humans handled the physical components, cleaning, stabilizing, and carefully reconstructing damaged pieces, the alien technicians would oversee the more delicate energy adjustments. As the first day unfolded, It quickly became clear that this was no small task. David and Thomas worked side by side, sorting shattered fragments and matching them to their original forms. The alien materials responded strangely to human touch. At times they vibrated faintly, other times they seemed to repel human skin entirely. "Okay," David muttered. "This is like putting together the most complicated puzzle imaginable, and the pieces don't even like me." Thomas smiled faintly as he carefully aligned a fragment of what looked like a ceremonial blade. "At least we're doing something constructive for a change." Beats sitting in a council chamber, waiting to get shot down. "True," David admitted, "but this still feels like walking a tightrope." Their alien guide monitored their work, occasionally stepping in to offer guidance. Despite her initial stern demeanor, she seemed to appreciate their genuine effort. At one point, she stopped to explain the significance of one of the artifacts, a spiraling orb that shifted colors depending on its orientation. "This orb is the Eye of Terrace," she said. "It is said to hold the memories of my people's ancestors. When the humans entered this chamber, the orb fractured, scattering fragments across the hall. We have managed to retrieve most of them, but they must be perfectly aligned to restore the memory flow." Thomas and David exchanged a glance. The stakes were clearly higher than they had imagined. "Guess we better get it right, then," David said, picking up another fragment. As they worked late into the evening, a subtle camaraderie formed between the humans and the alien technicians. Willingness to learn. By the end of their first full day, they had successfully pieced together a handful of simpler artifacts. While the larger, more significant relics still loomed ahead, the progress felt like a small victory. David stretched his arms, his muscles aching from the unfamiliar task. "Well, we didn't break anything today. That's gotta count for something." Thomas chuckled. "It's a start." Their guide approached as they cleaned up their tools. "You have done well so far," she said, her voice no longer as sharp as before. "But the most challenging artifacts remain. Rest tonight. Tomorrow you will attempt the Eye of Terrace." Thomas nodded, exhaustion settling over him. "Thank you. We'll be ready." As they made their way to the quarters provided for them, David looked at Thomas and said quietly, "You know, for a guy who's never handled an alien relic before, you're doing pretty well. And for a guy who doesn't even like puzzles, you're not bad either," Thomas replied. David smirked. "Don't get used to it. I'm still hoping we survive long enough to get back to actual Earth food." The two men shared a brief laugh, a moment of levity amidst the tension. As they turned in for the night, the weight of the next day's task lingered in their minds. But for now, they allowed themselves a small moment of triumph. Chapter 5: A Challenge to Authority. The next morning, the alien technicians were already bustling around the Eye of Terrace when Thomas and David arrived. The massive orb, now mostly reassembled, shimmered faintly with muted colors. It hovered above a dais that emitted a low, steady hum. Several intricate tools were arranged neatly on a nearby table, their purposes still a mystery to the humans. Thomas and David exchanged a quick glance before approaching. "Let's hope we're ready for this," David muttered, rolling his shoulders. Their guide stood at the edge of the platform, her sharp, indigo features calm but watchful. "Today's work is critical. The eye must be fully restored before the council will consider any change in their stance. I trust you have reviewed the schematics provided." Thomas nodded, holding up a digital slate where they had studied the diagrams. "We have. The energy alignment pattern still seems a bit tricky, but we think we understand the sequence." David gestured to the array of delicate crystal shards still waiting to be fitted. "Is there anything we should know about these pieces before we start? Like what happens if we, I don't know, put one in upside down?" The advisor gave a faint, humorless smile. "The orb's memory pathways would fracture, potentially causing irreparable damage. So, do not put them in upside down." David made a face. "Great. No pressure. Let's focus," Thomas said, stepping closer to examine the fragments. He picked up one carefully, feeling the faint vibration as he turned it in his hand. The patterns etched into the surface seemed to shift under the light. "This one looks like it fits near the top quadrant," David peered at the digital diagram again. Yeah, looks right. If you angle it slightly clockwise, it should snap into place. As Thomas adjusted the fragment, it suddenly clicked into a groove. The orb's colors rippled faintly, growing brighter for a brief moment before settling back to a steady glow. Not bad, David remarked. Let's keep that streak going. For the next several hours, the two of them worked methodically. Each fragment presented a new challenge. Some were so delicate that even breathing on them too heavily seemed like a risk. Others hummed so loudly when touched that the technicians had to step in and stabilize the energy field. Their guide observed closely, occasionally stepping in to correct their technique. As the work progressed, her initial skepticism seemed to soften. "You've learned quickly," she said, almost to herself, as Thomas secured another shard. "I admit I did not expect humans to adapt so well to a task like this." Thomas glanced at her. "When the stakes are this high, you find ways to adapt. And having a clear goal helps." David nodded in agreement. "Besides, it's not all that different from what we do back home. Sometimes we're just piecing together old machines or systems to get them running again. This might be more advanced, but the principle's the same. Take your time, don't force anything, and pay attention to details." The advisor regarded them thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is more to your people than I was led to believe." Thomas took a steadying breath before attempting to place the next piece. "That's what we're trying to show. There's more to us than just the mistakes we've made." By mid-afternoon, the orb was nearly complete. The once muted glow now radiated a soft, steady light, and the hum had deepened into a resonant thrum that filled the chamber. Thomas and David stepped back to admire their progress, sharing a moment of quiet satisfaction. "Looking good," David said, wiping his hands on his pants. "Still a few pieces left, though." Before they could resume, the Warlord himself entered the chamber. His towering presence cast a long shadow across the platform. The other technicians and the advisor immediately stopped what they were doing and straightened, their postures stiff. The Warlord's glowing white eyes settled on the orb, then shifted to Thomas and David. "You have made progress," he said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. "Yet the most delicate alignment remains. One error, and all your work will be undone." Thomas stood his ground. "We're prepared to finish the task. If there's something more we need to know, now would be a good time to share it." The Warlord regarded him in silence for a moment, then gestured to his advisor. "Continue to guide them. I will observe." David leaned toward Thomas, his voice low. "I don't like having him breathing down our necks." "Let's just focus on the orb," Thomas replied. "If we get this right, he might start to listen to reason." With the Warlord watching, the final fragments were placed one by one. Each piece required careful handling, precise positioning, and constant coordination with the alien technicians. Tension hung in the air, but step by step, the orb grew brighter, its internal patterns becoming more intricate. Finally, Thomas placed the last shard. A soft chime filled the chamber as the orb's light intensified, bathing the entire room in a warm glow. The hum steadied, and the previously chaotic patterns within the orb settled into a harmonious flow. The Warlord spoke after a long pause. "You have restored the Eye of Terrace. I will acknowledge this accomplishment, but do not mistake this for trust. Trust must still be earned." Thomas inclined his head respectfully. "We understand, and will keep working to earn it." David, standing beside him, added, "One step at a time." Chapter 6. The Spark of Affection. Thomas and David returned to their quarters that evening feeling both relieved and utterly drained. Their small but meaningful triumph with the Eye of Terrace had been enough to grant them a temporary reprieve from the Warlord's looming wrath. Still, they knew their work was far from over. After a quiet meal in the ship's mess hall, a strange mix of alien vegetables and some form of gelatinous protein, they headed to the small observation deck where they could talk in private. The room was dim, illuminated by the soft glow of stars outside the window. Earth was nothing more than a pale dot in the distance, a reminder of the stakes. David leaned against the railing, looking out at the void. "So what's the next move?" "They let us fix their orb," but that's not exactly a signed peace treaty. Thomas sat on a nearby bench, rubbing his temples. I don't know. One step at a time. We've proven we can listen and follow instructions. Maybe now they'll hear us out. David smirked. You're really banking on they earn their trust thing, huh? What happens if they still decide they don't like us after all this? Thomas sighed. We can't control that. All we can do is show them who we really are. If they still hate us after that, well, at least we'll know we tried. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The quiet hum of the ship filled the space between them. After a few minutes, the observation deck door slid open. Their alien guide entered. Her indigo features softened in the low light. She carried a small, glowing object in her hands, and her presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Good evening, she said, her tone neutral but calm. I thought I might find you here. Thomas sat up straighter. We were just thinking things through. What brings you by? She approached, holding out the glowing object, a cube with shifting colors and patterns inside. This is a memory crystal, she explained. It holds a record of the restoration process you completed today. I thought you might like to see how it turned out. David reached for it, then hesitated. It's not going to blow up in my hands, is it? She raised a brow, clearly unamused. No, it will not. It is harmless. Touch it, and you will see. He carefully took the crystal, turning it over in his hands. Inside, the patterns shifted, forming images of the Eye of Terrace glowing brightly, the fragments aligning perfectly. A soft, melodic hum accompanied the visuals, filling the air. Thomas leaned in, intrigued. It's beautiful. Does it hold sound, too? Yes, she said, her voice quieter now. It preserves not only the image but also the energy harmonics. This is how we remember our work, our history, our traditions. David looked up, meeting her gaze. I'll admit, it's pretty impressive. Thanks for showing us. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. You have earned the right to see it. Your efforts today were not insignificant. Thomas studied her expression, searching for a hint of what she truly thought of them. We appreciate it, he said. But I get the feeling you didn't come here just to show us the crystal. Is there something else on your mind? The alien's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she nodded. Yes, I wanted to ask you a question. Something I have not asked before. David crossed his arms, curious. All right, fire away. She hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. Your people, when they explore the unknown, what drives them? What motivates you to take such risks? Thomas tilted his head, considering the question. Curiosity, mostly. A need to understand the universe around us. Sometimes it's survival, looking for new resources, new opportunities. But at the core of it, it's about discovery. Finding something bigger than ourselves. David chimed in. Yeah, we've got plenty of flaws, but we're always reaching for something more. Some call it ambition, others call it arrogance. Either way, we don't sit still for long. The alien regarded them silently, her luminous eyes reflecting the shifting light of the crystal. I have never encountered a species quite like yours, she said at last. You are unpredictable, imperfect, yet there is something compelling about your drive. It sets you apart. Thomas smiled faintly. I'll take that as a compliment. She stepped closer, her presence suddenly more personal, more immediate. Perhaps it is, she said softly. For a moment, the three of them stood together, the memory crystal glowing gently in the dim room. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken understanding. As they stood in that quiet space, something began to shift, not just between them and their guide, but within themselves. Chapter 7. The Warlord's Crisis. In the vast expanse of the alien flagship's command chamber, the Warlord stood with his arms crossed, staring at a projection of Earth's solar system. The holographic display flickered faintly, the various planets rendered in eerie, glowing detail. Behind him, his most trusted advisors lingered in tense silence. The Warlord's gaze didn't waver as he spoke. They make progress with the Eye of Terrace, yet their intentions remain unclear. Their so-called diplomacy may simply be a prelude to deception. One advisor, a tall alien with segmented limbs that shimmered like polished metal, stepped forward. Their work on the artifact has been meticulous. They have followed our instructions without fault. And yet, they have not earned my trust. The warlord's voice was as sharp as a blade. Trust is not given freely, it is taken by action, by proof. One success does not erase their previous transgressions. Another advisor, this one shorter with translucent skin that revealed faintly glowing veins, spoke hesitantly. Perhaps their efforts are genuine. They seem to seek understanding, not conquest. The warlord turned sharply, his piercing white eyes locking onto the smaller advisor. Do you suggest we forget what they have done? Their ignorance led to this mess, and their recklessness damaged our sacred relics. A voice cut through the tension. Clear, calm, and confident. The indigo-skinned female advisor who had been guiding the humans stepped into the chamber. And yet they are here. They have stayed. They have worked. They have shown patience and care. The warlord's expression darkened. You defend them? I observe them, she replied firmly. What I see are individuals willing to learn, willing to put in the effort to right their wrongs. They are not without fault, but they are also not without merit. He studied her carefully, his glowing eyes narrowing. And what if they are simply stalling for time? What if their efforts are a distraction, a way to weaken our resolve? The advisor stepped closer. Then let them prove otherwise. Continue to test them, but do not dismiss the progress they've made. Trust must be earned, but it can only be earned if the opportunity to earn it is given. For a long moment, the chamber fell silent. The warlord's imposing figure loomed over everyone else, his presence an undeniable weight. But his piercing gaze lingered on his advisor longer than anyone else. Her words, though measured, carried a subtle challenge. Very well, he said finally. I will not act rashly yet, but mark my words. The moment they falter, the moment they show any sign of deceit, I will end this charade. I will not allow our people's honor to be trampled upon. The advisors exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The warlord turned back to the holographic display, his expression unreadable. But the female advisor remained standing, her gaze unwavering. Outside the command chamber, Thomas and David were busy reviewing their next task. They sat in a small conference room, their makeshift workstation covered in diagrams and alien schematics. You think he's gonna come around? David asked, leaning back in his chair. Or is this just another hurdle before he shuts us down completely? Thomas tapped his stylus against the table. Honestly, I don't know. He's clearly not a fan of humans, but he hasn't ordered us out yet. That has to mean something. David frowned, resting his hands behind his head. Still feels like we're walking a tightrope. One wrong move and we're done. That's why we don't make any wrong moves, Thomas said simply. The door opened, and the indigo-skinned advisor entered. She carried her usual calm demeanor, but her eyes lingered on Thomas for a moment longer than usual. How did your meeting go? Thomas asked. She hesitated before answering. The warlord remains skeptical. He does not trust you. David rolled his eyes. No kidding. But, she continued, her voice steady, he has agreed to let you continue your work, for now. Thomas met her gaze, his tone sincere. Thank you. I know that couldn't have been easy to push for. I did what was necessary, she replied, but her voice softened slightly. I have seen your efforts. I know they are not without meaning. David glanced between the two of them, then quickly turned his attention back to the schematics. Well, at least we know where we stand. What's next on the agenda? She set a new diagram on the table. This, she said, a smaller artifact, but one of considerable importance. If you can restore it, the council may be further convinced of your intentions. Thomas and David leaned in to examine the diagram, the intricate details reflecting a level of complexity even greater than the Eye of Terrace. More intricate than a Swiss watch, David muttered. Thomas smirked. Good thing we've got steady hands. The advisor watched them for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and left the room, leaving the two men to their work. Do you think she's on our side? David asked quietly once she was gone. Thomas looked at him, then back at the diagram. I think she's on the side of doing what's right. Whether that's the same as being on our side, I guess we'll find out. David nodded, his face serious. Fair enough. Let's get to it. Chapter 8. A New Path Forward. The council chamber was eerily silent as the warlord stared at the central platform. The restored artifacts now glowed with renewed vitality, their intricate patterns radiating soft light. Thomas and David stood before the council members, flanked by their alien advisor. Tension hung heavy in the air. Every set of eyes, alien and human, focused on the warlord's next move. David leaned slightly toward Thomas and murmured, "You think this is where we find out if we've been wasting our time?" "Let's hope not," Thomas replied, keeping his tone level. "But be ready for anything." The warlord finally stepped forward, his imposing figure towering over the assembly. His piercing white eyes swept across the room, lingering on the restored artifacts before locking onto Thomas. "You have done what was asked. The relics are whole again, their energy restored. Yet the question remains, what does this prove?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "It proves that we're willing to put in the effort, that we're not here to take or destroy, but to learn and make amends." David added, "And it shows we can follow through. We didn't just talk, we acted. We did what you said needed to be done." A faint murmur rippled through the council. Some of the alien delegates nodded in quiet approval, while others remained stone-faced. The warlord's expression was unreadable, but the fact that he hadn't dismissed them yet was, at least, a small victory. One of the council members with translucent skin leaned forward, addressing the warlord directly. "Their actions have brought a measure of restoration to what was damaged. Perhaps they are not the reckless marauders we first believed them to be." Another delegate, the feathered one, clicked its beak-like mouth. "They may be capable of cooperation. This demonstration is not meaningless." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "You would trust them so easily? A few repaired artifacts do not erase years of carelessness." "It is not a matter of erasure," the indigo-skinned advisor said, stepping forward. Her calm voice cut through the room. "It is a matter of choosing a different path. These humans have shown that they can be more than what we assumed. Perhaps that is enough to warrant further dialogue." David turned his head slightly, whispering, "I think she's putting her reputation on the line for us." "She's not the only one," Thomas whispered back, then raised his voice to address the council. "We're not asking you to forget the past. We're asking you to consider a future where we work together. We know there's a lot of distrust, and we don't expect that to vanish overnight.